The rain had started at 5 in the morning, which meant the subway smelled like wet coats and frustration by 6:15, and by 7 every coffee shop within 4 blocks of Rockefeller Center had a line running out the door. Janet Cole did not have time for any of this. She stood under her umbrella on 49th Street, holding her laptop bag. Lily's forgotten gym sneakers stuffed into a tote on her left shoulder in a pitch deck draft she'd been mentally revising since 3 a.m., cycling through her head like a broken record. The Meridian Group's quarterly review was in 9 days. Her boss, Craig Holt, had sent a 6 a.m. email with 4 new thoughts, which was Craig speak for 4 new demands, and she had exactly 45 minutes before her first call of the day. She ducked into Cafe Rowan, a narrow midtown spot she'd been coming to since her first year at Meridian. The barista, a young man named Pedro, who knew her order without asking, caught her eye from behind the counter and held up 2 fingers. 2 people ahead of her. She exhaled and joined the line. The man in front of her was tall, dark coat. No umbrella hair, slightly damp at the temples. He was reading something on his phone with the focused stillness of someone who had never once in his life felt the particular stress of also needing to drop off gym shoes before 8:30. His coffee order when he reached the counter was a flat white. No adjustments, no name. Janet stepped forward. "Flat white 1 sugar oat milk and a plain croissant," she said. "For Janet." She turned to slide her tote off her shoulder to get her wallet, and the tote swung wide, caught the man's cup just as Pedro slid it across the counter. The flat white went over, all of it, down the front of a shirt that was, she now noticed, extremely white and extremely well ironed. "Oh, God." She set everything down on the counter in one graceless move. "I'm so sorry, Pedro. Can you grab some—" "It's fine," the man said. His voice was calm in a way that felt practiced. "It's not fine. It's all over you." She was already reaching across for the stack of napkins, handing them over without quite looking at his face. "I'll cover the dry cleaning. Do you have a card? Or I can do you use Venmo?" "Most people my daughter's age use Venmo, but I'm guessing you—" "I don't use Venmo." She looked up then. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't immediately name. Not annoyed, not charmed exactly. Something more like interested. The way a person looks at something they didn't expect to find. He was probably 50, give or take, sharp jaw gray threading through dark hair at the sides. The kind of face that had been handsome when it was younger, and had only gotten more so with the architecture that time added to it. His eyes were a particular shade of dark brown that caught the coffee shop light and held it. None of that was relevant. "A card then," Janet said. "Or just tell me where to send a check. Forget the shirt." He accepted the napkins with one hand and extended the other. "Nathaniel Cross." She shook it, firm grip brief. "Janet Cole, I'm genuinely sorry about your morning." "My morning is fine." He tilted his head slightly. "Is yours full?" It was such an unexpected question that she almost laughed. Almost. "Getting there," she said. "Eventually." Pedro handed her a new coffee and a paper bag with the croissant. She shouldered her bags more carefully, this time tucked her umbrella under her arm, and turned for the door. "Janet Cole," the man Nathaniel Cross said behind her, not loudly, just enough. She half turned. "Have a better morning." She nodded once, pushed the door open, and walked back out into the rain. She forgot about him before she reached the corner. He did not forget about her. "Oh." Nathaniel Cross stood at the counter of Cafe Rowan for another moment after she left, one hand still holding the damp napkins, and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time settle quietly in his chest. He was not a man who chased feelings. He was a man who analyzed them, filed them, and returned to work. He had built a company worth $4.8 billion by being exactly that kind of man. But he found himself as he left the coffee shop, and his driver pulled the town car to the curb, asking his assistant something he hadn't asked in years. "Marcus." He got into the back seat and settled his coat. "I need you to find someone for me. First name Janet, last name Cole." She mentioned the name Meridian, possibly the Meridian Group on 6th Avenue. Marketing, I'd guess. Mid-level to senior. His assistant Marcus was 22, efficient, and had learned quickly that Mr. Cross did not explain his reasons, simply said, "I'll have it for you within the hour." "Good." Nathaniel looked out at the gray Manhattan morning and said nothing else. The Meridian Group occupied floors 14 through 17 of a glass tower on 6th Avenue that looked more impressive than it was. It was a mid-size firm real estate lifestyle marketing corporate branding. Some hospitality work perpetually 2 or 3 strong years away from the kind of revenue that would let it stop worrying about whether it was 2 or 3 strong years away from anything. Janet had been there for 8 years. She'd come in as a senior coordinator with a Boston University degree, a professional reputation she'd rebuilt methodically after 2 years of being Derek's wife, had softened the edges of her ambition, and a 4-year-old daughter she dropped at her mother's apartment on 107th Street every morning before taking the one train downtown. She was now marketing manager. She had a window office, a team of 4, and a salary that covered the rent on her Upper West Side 2-bedroom Lily school, her mother's occasional help with groceries, and not a great deal else. She did not complain about this. She had made the math work for 10 years. She was good at it. The Crawford pitch went well, said Rachel Huang, dropping into the chair across from Janet's desk without knocking, which was her habit. Rachel was the firm's senior account coordinator, 41 Sharp, and Janet's closest friend at Meridian, in the way that people who spent 9 hours a day in proximity to each other and shared similar levels of thinly disguised exhaustion became close friends. Craig's pleased, which means he'll find something to not be pleased about by Thursday. He already sent me 4 thoughts at 6 a.m. Thoughts? Rachel made a face. That man has never had a thought. He has suggestions that he's rebranded as thoughts. She reached over and took a grape from the bunch on Janet's desk without asking. How's the quarterly deck? It's getting there. Janet was scrolling through her email as she talked the way she did most things simultaneously efficiently. I need the Q3 retention numbers from David before I can finish the 3rd section, and David has been answering email at the speed of a man who does not understand the concept of deadlines. David does not understand the concept of deadlines, or Mondays, or pants with a button. Rachel ate another grape. Lily's recital's still Friday. Thursday. I thought you said Friday. I said Thursday. You heard Friday. I always hear what I want to hear. It's a gift. Rachel smoothed her blazer and turned for the door, then stopped. Oh, did you see the all-staff from Craig this morning? The second one? Janet looked up. I only saw the 6 a.m. thoughts. There was a 9:15. Something about a new business inquiry. He's calling a team lead meeting at 2. Janet went back to her inbox. She found it a one-line all-staff from Craig Holt, Director of Client Services, timestamp 9:17 a.m. All team leads conference room B at 2 p.m. Exciting new business development to discuss. Come prepared. She read it twice, trying to determine what excited meant in Craig's register. It was a wide spectrum. Conference room B smelled like dry erase markers and the ghost of someone's lunch. The blinds were half drawn against the afternoon glare. Janet took a seat near the window beside Marcus Webb from Business Development and across from Priya Okafor, who ran Meridian's hospitality accounts and had the specific energy of someone who had been in too many meetings that started with the word exciting. Craig arrived 3 minutes late, which was his way of signaling that his time was more valuable than theirs, and set a folder on the table with the particular care of a man presenting a gift. Good news, he said. Big news, actually. He let the pause stretch in the way that people do when they want the room to feel anticipation they haven't earned yet. We've received a formal inquiry, an invitation to pitch from Cross Ventures. The room was quiet for a beat. Marcus said at first, Cross Ventures, as in Nathaniel Cross's holding company? Yes. Craig allowed himself a small smile. They're launching a new lifestyle and real estate development brand, residential hospitality, a retail component. They need a full marketing strategy, brand identity, campaign architecture, launch, positioning, digital, and print. 12-month initial engagement with a 2-year option to renew. What's the value? Priya asked. The initial engagement is structured at $4 million, Craig said. With the renewal option, we're looking at potentially 10 over 3 years. Nobody said anything for a moment. $10 million was more than Meridian had billed in its best single year. Janet was already doing the math on the scope. Full brand build launch campaign, 12 months of strategy for a Cross Ventures property, which would mean visibility at a level Meridian had never had. The kind of engagement that would put them on the map with clients they currently couldn't get meetings with. Who's pitching? She asked. Craig looked at her with the expression of someone who had already decided the answer and was enjoying the moment before delivering it. I want you to lead it, Janet. Your team, plus Marcus for the business structuring side. 6 weeks to pitch presentation. She nodded. She was already building the outline in her head. I don't need to tell you, Craig said, closing the folder, what winning this means for the firm. And for everyone in this room. He looked around the table in the way that was meant to feel collegial and mostly felt like a warning. Any questions? There were several. Janet didn't ask any of them. She was already working.
Oh,
She told Lily about it over dinner pasta, with the jarred marinara that Lily had declared superior to the homemade version 2 years ago, a verdict Janet had accepted with more relief than she admitted. Cross Ventures, Lily looked up from twirling her fork. That's Nathaniel Cross's company. How do you know who Nathaniel Cross is? Mom. He's like very famous. Lily said this with the gentle condescension of a 14-year-old explaining the obvious. He was on the cover of Forbes last year. Marcus showed me. She caught herself. I saw it at the dentist's office. You don't read Forbes at the dentist. I was bored. Who's Marcus? Nobody. Lily concentrated very intently on her pasta. Is it a big deal, the pitch? Janet considered the question honestly, the way she always tried to do with her daughter. It could be. It's the kind of project that changes things. If we win it, then you'll win it. It's not that simple. You said that about the Harrison account, and you won that too. Lily pointed her fork. You always think things are harder than they turn out to be. Some things are exactly as hard as they look. Name one. Janet smiled despite herself. Go do your homework. She worked until 1 in the morning that first night. The apartment was quiet. Lily asleep down the hall, the city doing its muffled nighttime thing, outside the windows sirens that peaked and faded, a car alarm. Someone eventually silenced the low hum of the building's ventilation. She had a glass of wine she forgot to drink, and 3 notebooks open on the coffee table. Cross Ventures. She'd pulled everything she could find in the 2 hours between the meeting and dinner pickup. Nathaniel Cross had built the company over 22 years from a regional commercial real estate firm into a diversified holding company with interests in media, hospitality, residential development, and private equity. He was private not in the hedge fund way where private was a specific kind of public performance, but genuinely reserved. Few interviews. Almost no social media presence. A profile in the Times 2 years ago that had told the reader more about what he chose not to say than what he said. His wife had died 6 years ago. Her name was Catherine. There was very little about her online. He had a son at Yale. None of this was relevant to the pitch. She closed the browser tab and went back to her notes. What Cross Ventures needed underneath all the language about brand architecture and lifestyle positioning was a story. They were creating something new, not renovating an existing property brand, but building from the ground up. The residential and hospitality components meant they were selling a way of living, not just a location. That was the angle. She wrote, "Who does this brand want to be, and who is the person it's built for?" She circled it twice and kept going. 6 weeks was not a lot of time for what Craig wanted. What Craig wanted was essentially a full brand strategy document, a creative brief, a 12-month campaign map, and a presentation that would make Cross Ventures feel that Meridian was not a mid-sized firm with decent work, but a strategic partner with exceptional vision. The gap between those two things was Janet's problem to solve. She restructured her team's schedule for the duration. David, her research analyst, the one who moved at the speed of geological formations, she assigned to competitive landscape and demographic analysis because those tasks rewarded thoroughness over speed. Nina, her junior creative, worked on visual direction concepts. Rachel, technically not on Janet's direct team, volunteered herself as a sounding board in the way that Rachel did things completely unbidden and completely necessary. "You're making it too academic," Rachel said 3 weeks in reviewing a draft of the positioning section over lunch at their desks. "This reads like a white paper. Cross Ventures isn't hiring a professor. They're hiring someone who can build them a brand that makes people feel something. The strategic foundation has to be there. It is there. I'm saying bury it. Let the emotion be the first thing they see and then show them the bones." Rachel flipped back a page. "Lead with the story. Who is this person? What does it feel like to live in a Cross Ventures property? Make them see it." Janet took the draft back and looked at it. Rachel was right. She knew Rachel was right, and it annoyed her briefly in the way that being correct annoys the person who was slightly more wrong. "I'll rework the opening section this weekend. Lily has plans. Lily has Marcus." She said it before she thought about it. Rachel's head came up. "Marcus? A boy from school. It's nothing she's 14. Janet kept her eyes on the document. "Her grandmother's taking them to the Met. Her grandmother is chaperoning a date." "It's not a date. They're going to look at Egyptian artifacts." "Janet, that's a date." Janet turned a page. I'm reworking the opening section.
Uh,
She spent Saturday morning at the kitchen table with her notebooks and her laptop. Lily gone to her mother's by 9, the apartment quiet in the particular way of a Saturday when you're working instead of resting. She had WNYC on low in the background. She drank 2 cups of coffee and started over on the positioning section. By noon, she had something she believed in. It was built around a single idea, built for the life you've already earned. Not aspirational, not the promise of a life you didn't have yet, but a recognition that the people Cross Ventures was targeting were already established, already successful, already done with the climb. What they wanted was a space that understood them without needing to be explained to, sophisticated without effort, quality that didn't announce itself. She thought briefly, and for no reason she could name, of the man in the coffee shop, the flat white with no adjustments, the way he'd asked about her morning with the directness of someone who didn't traffic in social pleasantries. She pushed the thought aside and kept writing. Presentation day was a Tuesday in early November. Gray sky wind off the Hudson, the kind of cold that arrived in New York not gradually, but as a decision. The Cross Ventures offices were on the 42nd floor of a building on Park Avenue South that had been renovated recently enough that everything still looked intentional. The lobby was pale stone and warm light, and there were no corporate logos anywhere, which Janet noted as deliberate, the kind of confidence that didn't need to announce itself. She arrived with her team 20 minutes early. Marcus Webb adjusted his tie in the elevator. Nina carried the presentation materials with both hands. David had miraculously pressed his jacket. Janet was carrying her laptop bag and nothing else. She'd rehearsed the presentation 4 times in the past week. She knew it the way she knew the layout of her apartment in the dark, by feel, by memory, by the logic of what came next. The conference room was large and spare. Floor-to-ceiling windows with the kind of view that made Manhattan look like a deliberate composition rather than an accident. A long table, 12 chairs, a screen at the far end. The Cross Ventures team filed in a woman named Sandra, who was head of brand development, a man named Philip from their development division. 2 others Janet didn't catch the names of. Then a younger man, early 30s, impeccably dressed with the particular posture of someone who worked directly for someone important and had absorbed some of that importance by proximity. And then from a side door, Nathaniel Cross. Janet recognized him before she'd fully processed that she was recognizing him. The dark coat was gone. He was in a charcoal suit, no tie, white shirt with the collar open. He moved through the room in the unhurried way of a person who had never needed to rush toward anything, and he took the center seat at the far end of the table and settled in and looked up. His eyes found her immediately and held. She did not let her expression change. She pulled out her chair, sat, and opened her laptop. Across the table, she could see Marcus Webb doing a very poor job of not looking rattled. "Good morning, Janet said to the Cross Ventures team, to Nathaniel Cross at the end of the table, who was looking at her with the same expression he'd had in the coffee shop, that particular kind of interest she still didn't quite have a word for. "Thank you for the opportunity to present." She clicked the first slide. "I want to start not with a strategy, but with a question. Who is the person that a Cross Ventures property is actually built for?" Nathaniel Cross leaned back slightly in his chair, his expression settling into something attentive and still. She talked for 41 minutes. She covered research, positioning, creative direction, campaign, and architecture, digital strategy, KPIs, and timeline. She had rehearsed every word, but the room made her sharper, not flatter. The silence at the table was the particular silence of people who were listening rather than waiting for their turn, and it pushed her to be precise, to be clear, to trust the work. When she finished, Sandra asked 3 detailed questions. Philip asked 2. One of the unnamed people asked about budget allocation, and Janet walked them through the model without hesitation. Nathaniel Cross asked 1 question. "The brand idea built for the life you've already earned." He leaned forward slightly. "How did you arrive at that?" Janet looked at him directly. "I asked myself what was missing in the high-end residential and hospitality market. Most brands in this space are still selling aspiration. They're selling the future. But the people you're targeting aren't aspirational. They're established. They want to be recognized for what they've already built, not sold something they still need to achieve." She paused. "It's the difference between being welcomed and being impressed." The room was quiet for a moment. "Thank you," Nathaniel Cross said. And that was all. The call came 11 days later. Craig took it in his office with the door closed, which meant by 4:15 the entire team knew something had happened, because Craig's office door was rarely closed and never for good reasons. He came out at 4:20 with an expression that Janet had never seen on his face before, something close to awe, which was not a natural emotion for Craig Holt. He stopped in her doorway. "We got it." She looked up from her screen. "Cross Ventures accepted. Full engagement 12 months, 4 million. Contract language starts next week." He put one hand on the doorframe. "Janet, we got it." She let herself feel it for exactly one moment, the clean, complete satisfaction of something difficult done well. Then, "I'll need to restructure the team for execution. We should talk about resourcing." Craig laughed, which was also rare. Yes, we'll talk about resourcing, but can you just take the moment for 5 seconds? She smiled. $4 million. $4 million. Okay, I've taken the moment. She turned back to her screen. "When can I see the contract draft?" Craig shook his head, still almost smiling, and walked away.
Keep that.
She called her mother from the subway platform on the way home, standing against the tiled wall with the noise of the station around her. The announcements, the approach of the downtown train, a busker somewhere playing something she couldn't quite identify. "We won the pitch," she said when her mother answered. A pause, and then her mother said, "How much?" $4 million to start. More if we renew." Another pause. "JaJanet Marie Cole. Mom, your father would have—" Her mother stopped. "He would have been very pleased." Janet looked down at the platform. Her father had been a careful man, a deliberate man, an engineer who believed in measured effort and reliable outcomes. He'd died 3 years ago in the same methodical way he'd lived, and she still thought of him more often than she expected. "I know," she said. "I know he would have." The train came. She got on. She stood in the car, holding the pole swaying with the motion of the train, and allowed herself to feel the full weight of the day. The presentation, the long weeks of work, the satisfaction of the call. $4 million for a firm that had never seen anything close to it. She had earned this. She was certain of it. She was certain of it. She would remember that certainty later, the clean, uncomplicated confidence of it, and she would hold on to it, and she would discover in the months ahead that even certainties can have complicated edges that only become visible when the light changes. But on the train swaying downtown with the city moving past the dark windows, she allowed herself for the first time in a long time to simply feel good about something she had made. 3 days later, she got an email from Craig with the contract draft attached. In the CC line, she noticed an address she didn't recognize. She almost didn't look at it. m.reeves@crossventures.com. She didn't know who Reeves was. It was probably an assistant. She filed the email and went back to work. She did not yet know that Nathaniel Cross had been the one to make the first call to Craig Holt. Not 11 days after the pitch. 3 weeks before she'd ever walked into that conference room. She did not yet know that Cross Ventures had reviewed and declined proposals from 3 other firms in the month preceding hers. Firms with twice Meridian's revenue and half her vision. She did not yet know any of this. She only knew the work and the win and the feeling of standing at the beginning of something that might finally change the shape of things. She went home. She told Lily. Lily said, "Obviously." And Janet laughed. Really laughed. The kind that came from the chest for the first time in longer than she could remember. The contract arrived on a Wednesday, 12 pages clean and precise, with a cover letter signed by Sandra Merrill, head of brand development at Cross Ventures, and a request to schedule a kickoff call within the week. Janet read it twice, made 7 margin notes, sent it to Meridian's outside counsel, and had her revisions back to Cross Ventures by Friday afternoon. On Monday, Sandra called to say that Cross Ventures had accepted all 7 of Janet's suggested modifications without negotiation. "That's unusual," Rachel said when Janet told her. They were eating lunch at their desks, a habit they'd developed over 8 years and had never once discussed breaking. Contracts at that level usually go 3 rounds minimum. Maybe their legal team was busy. Or maybe they were just happy to move. Rachel stabbed a piece of cucumber. Either way, you should be suspicious of anything that easy. It's a contract, Rachel, not a Trojan horse. I'm just saying, everything that turns out to be bad starts out being easy. That's not a principle. That's anxiety with better phrasing. Rachel pointed her fork. I'm going to make that a bumper sticker. The kickoff call happened that Thursday. Sandra ran it efficiently. 30 minutes, clear agenda action items distributed before the end of the call. The Cross Ventures team was professional and direct. Nobody was difficult. Nobody tried to expand the scope in the first meeting, which was rarer than it should have been. Nathaniel Cross was not on the call. Janet had not expected him to be. He He was the CEO of a $4.8 billion company. He was not going to be on brand development kickoff calls. This was elementary. She had not thought about it until she found herself at the start of the call glancing at the participant list and registering his absence in a way that was more specific than it should have been. She put it aside and focused on the work.
Good.
The engagement required her to be at CrossVenture's offices twice a week for working sessions Tuesdays with Sandra's brand team, Thursdays with the development division for property-specific context. She brought Nina on Tuesdays for creative alignment and Marcus Webb on Thursdays for the business structure questions that arose when development and marketing overlapped. CrossVentures occupied 4 floors of their Park Avenue South building. The floors had the quality of spaces designed by people who understood that the best environments don't announce themselves. Natural materials, warm light, no corporate signage on the internal walls, good art that wasn't obviously expensive. The coffee was excellent. The conference rooms had windows. The staff moved quickly but not frantically. Janet noticed all of this because she noticed environments, the way a doctor notices posture professionally, habitually, because the space a company creates for itself tells you almost everything about what it believes about its own identity. She was in the middle of a Tuesday session with Sandra, 3 weeks into the engagement, when the conference room door opened and Nathaniel Cross walked in. He paused when he saw her, fractionally less than a second. "I didn't know you were using B," he said to Sandra. "A's double booked," Sandra said. "Vendor call ran over. We're almost done. Take your time." He turned to go, then stopped and turned back. His eyes landed on Janet with the particular quality she was beginning to recognize that settled, unhurried attention. "Miss Cole, how is the project coming?" "On schedule," Janet said. "The brand positioning framework goes to your team Monday." "Good." He looked at her for a moment in that way he had not uncomfortable just present. "And the brief you mentioned in the pitch, the secondary residential audience. It's built into the framework, section 4. I'd like to see it separately. Sandra can send you my direct address." "Of course." He nodded once and left. Sandra watched the door close. Then she looked at Janet with a small, unreadable expression. "He doesn't usually ask for direct copies of work materials," she said. "I'll send it Monday," Janet said, and turned back to her notes. She sent the brief on Monday at 9:15. He replied at 9:47. The reply was 3 paragraphs. It was the most substantive feedback she had received from anyone at CrossVentures to date, specific, intelligent, pushing on the right things. He questioned her assumptions about the 45 to 60 demographic split, offered a data point from a recent internal study she hadn't had access to, and asked a clarifying question about the messaging hierarchy that was exactly the question she had asked herself at 2 in the morning 3 weeks ago, and had answered, she now confirmed correctly. She wrote back a 5-paragraph reply. He responded in 40 minutes. This went on for 3 days. By Wednesday afternoon, they were 3 email threads deep on 3 separate elements of the brand strategy, and Janet became aware with the particular clarity of someone who has been concentrating too hard on a problem to see its shape that she was enjoying it. Not enjoying it in the careful, professional way she enjoyed a well-run meeting or a clean data set. Enjoying it in the way she enjoyed conversation with someone who thought carefully and said what they meant and didn't waste her time with preamble. She mentioned none of this to Rachel. She mentioned none of it to herself either, and took some satisfaction in the discipline of that. The Thursday session that week ran long. A question from the development team about how to sequence a soft launch versus a hard launch had turned into a 40-minute conversation about risk tolerance and brand timing. And by the time it resolved, Janet had missed her usual exit window and found herself alone in the elevator bank, the rest of her team already headed to the lobby. The elevator opened and Nathaniel Cross was in it. He registered her without visible surprise. She was becoming slightly suspicious of his capacity for visible surprise, which seemed minimal, and held the door. She stepped in. They rode in silence for 2 floors. Then he said, "The launch sequencing question. What's your recommendation? Soft launch, 8 weeks, Tribeca property only. Build organic word of mouth before you run any paid campaign." She looked at the floor numbers ticking down. The hard launch instinct makes sense from an investment recoup standpoint, but this brand's equity depends on feeling discovered rather than marketed. You spend $40 million on a hard launch, you risk making it feel like every other luxury development that's launched in the last 5 years. A pause. "That's what I thought." "Then why didn't you say so in the meeting?" "I wanted to hear your reasoning first." She looked at him. He was looking at the floor numbers with the same equanimity he brought to everything. That's a lot of trust to put in reasoning you hadn't heard yet. Not trust. He glanced over. Confidence. There's a difference. The elevator opened to the lobby. She walked out. He walked beside her for a few steps toward the main doors, which was not the direction she had expected him to be going. "Do you have 20 minutes?" he asked. She looked at him. "There's a coffee shop on 23rd I've been using for conversations I don't want to have in the building," he said. "Nothing clandestine. I just prefer to think in spaces where no one can interrupt me." 20 minutes, she said. "I have a 4 o'clock call." The coffee shop on 23rd was not Cafe Rowan. It was smaller, quieter, with a row of low wooden stools along a front window that looked out on the street and a menu written in chalk on a blackboard above the counter. The kind of place that existed in New York in the specific way that meant it had been there for 20 years and would be there for 20 more. They took 2 stools at the window. He ordered a black coffee. She ordered the same, which she did not usually do, and then briefly wondered why she'd done it and put the thought away. "I want to talk about the 10-year vision," he said. "Not the 12-month campaign. The brand's 10-year vision. That's not in scope." "I know. I'm not asking for a deliverable. I'm asking what you think." She looked at him. He was looking out the window at the street with the specific quality of someone who was not actually looking at the street. "Why? Because you're the only person I've talked to about this project who started with the right question." He turned slightly. "Who is this person for? Everything else follows from that. The agencies we talked to before you all started with the product, you started with the human being. That's not unusual. It's basic brand strategy." "It's basic in theory," he said. "In practice, almost no one does it." She wrapped her hands around the coffee cup and thought about the question honestly. 10 years. If you build it right, if you resist the temptation to expand too fast, which is the thing that kills brands like this, you could own a category that doesn't really exist yet. High-end residential hospitality hybrid at human scale. Not a hotel, not a traditional apartment building, not a resort. Something that operates like a very well-run private club, except the membership is where you live. She paused. "The problem is, you'll have to say no to a lot of money in years 3 and 4 when the pressure to scale comes. Most boards won't let you do that." "I don't have a board," he said. "I have investors, but final capital structure decisions are mine." "Then you might actually be able to do it." He looked at her for a moment. "And the person you build it for? Who are they?" "Someone who has been working towards something for 25 years and has arrived at it. Not the young, ambitious buyer that's a different product. This is the person who has earned enough to know what they actually want rather than what they thought they'd want when they started. They want quality that doesn't perform, space that doesn't explain itself." She picked up her coffee. "They're tired of things that are trying to impress them." There was a pause. Something shifted almost imperceptibly in his expression. "Is that biographical?" he said. She looked at him. "Partly." He nodded slowly as if this confirmed something he'd suspected. He looked back out the window. "My wife had a theory that," he said, "that the things you build reveal what you're looking for." A pause. She was usually right about things like that. The sentence landed in the space between them quietly, like something set down rather than thrown. Janet let it settle. "When did she die?" she said. 6 years ago, March." "I'm sorry." "Thank you." He said it simply without the deflection most people used. He looked at her. "You're raising a daughter alone." It was not a question. 14 years, she said, since she was 4. That's a long time to be the only one responsible. You stop thinking of it that way after a while. It just becomes how things are. "Does it, She considered it honestly. "No," she said. "Not entirely." He nodded. The acknowledgement felt like something, not pity, something more useful than pity. She looked at her phone. "I need to go." "Yes." He stood when she did a small automatic courtesy that she noticed and filed away without comment. At the door, he said, "The positioning framework on Monday. It's very good work." "Thank you." "I mean it," he said, not as a formality. She looked at him. "I know the difference." She went out into the 23rd Street afternoon and walked toward the subway, and she did not think about the way the hour had passed. How quickly, how cleanly, how much like a conversation between 2 people who had already been talking for years. She did not think about it. She was very deliberate about not thinking about it. She had been deliberate about not thinking about things before. She was practiced at it. When Derek left, packed his 2 good suitcases on a Tuesday morning while Lily was at preschool and was gone before Janet got back from the grocery store she had within 48 hours, shifted entirely into operational mode. What needed to happen? In what order? Who needed to be called? The emotional accounting came later in small increments, usually at inconvenient times, and she had learned to manage those too. She was good at managing things. It was both her greatest professional asset and the quality in herself that she sometimes at 1 in the morning, with a glass of wine she'd forgotten to drink, felt the weight of most. Lily called her out on it periodically with the specific artlessness of a 14-year-old who had not yet learned to be diplomatic about true things. "You do this thing," Lily had said once about 2 years ago, sitting cross-legged on the kitchen counter while Janet made dinner, "where something good happens and you immediately start managing it. Like you're afraid if you actually feel it, it'll disappear." Janet had kept stirring the sauce. "That's very perceptive. Mrs. Alvarez says I have strong emotional intelligence." "Mrs. Alvarez is right. So am I." "Yes," Janet had said. "You are." She thought about that conversation now, sitting on the one train heading uptown, the late afternoon light doing its particular October thing through the subway windows when the train came above ground at 125th. She thought about the coffee shop on 23rd and the ease of that hour, and Nathaniel Cross looking out at the street and saying my wife had a theory in the same tone other people used to describe the weather. She was not managing this one. She was simply noting it, setting it in an appropriate category. Professional relationship complicated by mutual interest in a shared project, not actionable and moving on. She was very clear about all of this. The complication arrived on a Saturday, which was the day complications preferred in Janet's experience. She was at the farmer's market in Columbus Circle, Lily, beside her wearing a large coat and carrying a canvas bag and eating a still warm cinnamon roll with the focused pleasure of someone performing a ritual, when her phone rang with an unfamiliar New York number. "JaJanet Cole," she answered. "Good morning." Nathaniel Cross's voice was recognizable immediately, that particular register unhurried and direct. "I hope I'm not interrupting something important." She looked at Lily, who was examining a bunch of kale without interest. "Farmer's Market," she said. "How did you get this number?" "Sandra has it from the contract files. I should have asked first." "Yes," she said. "You should have." A pause, not apologetic exactly, but acknowledging. "You're right, I apologize." She walked a few steps away from Lily toward the flower stalls. "Is something wrong with the project?" "No, the project is fine." Another pause. "I'm calling because there's a dinner next Friday, Architecture and Design Community Benefit for the City Planning Foundation. I thought you might find it interesting and useful. The guest list has several people who will be relevant to the Cross Ventures launch, and it would be a natural context to introduce you as the brand strategist." She let that land, processed it. "That's very thoughtful," she said carefully. "It's also," he said, "self-interested. I'd like to have the conversation." She looked at the flower stall, orange and yellow dahlias, autumn sunflowers, the particular New York abundance of a Saturday market. "What conversation?" "Any of them," he said. "We seem to have more than one." She was quiet for a moment. Lily appeared at her elbow with a paper bag of apples and an inquiring look. Janet held up one finger. "I'll think about it," she said. "That's fair. Send me the details through Sandra." "I will." She hung up. Lily was looking at her with the precise expression of a 14-year-old who has registered something and is deciding whether to deploy it. "Who was that?" "Work," Janet said. "You look different when it's work." "I always look the same." "Mom?" Lily tilted her head. "You look different." Janet took the bag of apples and turned toward the next stall. "You said you wanted to look at the bread." Lily followed, satisfied apparently with having made her observation, and said nothing else about it. She was occasionally, Janet thought, too much like her in all the right ways, and entirely too perceptive in all the inconvenient ones. She went to the dinner. She told herself this was a professional decision, which it was the guest list was genuinely relevant, and the context was exactly the kind of visibility that could benefit the Cross Ventures engagement and, by extension, Meridian. She told herself this clearly and completely. And then she stood in her closet for 35 minutes, deciding between 2 dresses, which was 29 minutes longer than she had ever spent on that decision for a professional event. She wore the black one, simple cut good fabric, the kind of dress that required no explanation. The event was in a converted warehouse space in the meatpacking district. Warm lighting, industrial bones made elegant a room full of architects and developers and urbanists and the various people who occupied the intersection of money and design. It was the kind of room Janet was comfortable in. She had spent her career learning to read rooms like this, to identify the people worth talking to and move toward them naturally, to listen more than she spoke and leave people with the sense that they'd been in a better conversation than they'd expected. Nathaniel found her 20 minutes in near the bar while she was talking to an architect named James Obie, who had done 2 of the early Cross Ventures property renovations and was describing with specific and charming passion the problem of making high ceilings feel intimate. James, Nathaniel said, arriving at her shoulder with the ease of someone for whom every room was a familiar room. Nate? The architect's face lit up. I was just telling Ms. Cole about the Tribeca job. She knows more about the Tribeca job than most of my own team at this point. He glanced at Janet. You look well. Thank you, she said. So do you. It was the first time she had seen him outside of an office context. He was in a dark suit, no tie the collar open, the same configuration she was beginning to think of as his signature. He looked in this room exactly like himself, which she was noticing was unusual for a man of his wealth and visibility. Most people in rooms like this calibrated themselves to the room. He didn't seem to bother. James Obie was called away by someone across the room, and then it was just the 2 of them, which she had a feeling was not entirely accidental. I'm glad you came, he said. It's a good room. She looked around it. Though I suspect you knew that before you called. The corner of his mouth moved, almost a smile. I did. Then that was a reasonably effective strategy. I have some experience with effective strategies. She looked at him. So do I, she said. It's worth keeping in mind. He looked at her for a moment with that steady attention. Fair warning, he said. Noted. They talked for the better part of the evening. Not exclusively the nature of events like this, making it easy to move and return, but anchored to each other in the way of 2 people who, in a room full of interesting people, had found the one conversation they wanted to be in. He talked about the early years of Cross Ventures when it was 4 people in a midtown sublet and a business plan that his first 3 investors had passed on. She talked about Boston University, the scholarship she'd nearly lost in her junior year when her father had a health scare, and she'd spent 2 months going back and forth to Providence on weekends, falling behind in everything, and the professor who'd given her an extension without asking why, which was the only reason she'd graduated on schedule. What was the degree? He asked. Marketing and communications with a minor in economics. She set her glass down. My father wanted engineering. He was an engineer, very precise, very methodical. He thought marketing was something you did when you ran out of better options. Did he change his mind? Gradually, when I got the Meridian job, he said he supposed it was a real industry after all. She smiled. Coming from him, that was essentially a parade. He sounds like someone worth impressing. He was. She paused. He died 3 years ago. I'm sorry. Thank you. She said it simply the way he had said the same thing about his wife, without the usual apology for having brought it up. They had both, she was realizing, learned the particular economy of grief that came with having carried it for a while. He walked her to the street at the end of the evening. It was cold, the clear, dry cold of a New York November that had finally committed to being winter, and she had a coat but wished briefly for a warmer one. He flagged her a cab without being asked. I can get my own cab, she said. I know. He held the door when it arrived. Have a good weekend, Janet. She got in. She didn't look back. She stared at the city going by outside the cab window and thought about nothing in particular for the length of the ride. And when she got home, she found Lily asleep on the couch with a book open on her chest and the television on low, and she turned off the TV and pulled a blanket over her daughter and stood in the quiet apartment for a moment and felt something she didn't immediately try to categorize. She let it be what it was, for once. The following Tuesday, Janet came back from the Cross Ventures session to find a voicemail on her cell phone from a number she didn't recognize. The area code was New York, but the specific prefix was unfamiliar. She listened to it standing in the Meridian elevator on the way up to 14. Janet, hi, it's Derek. She stood very still. I know it's been a while. I've been thinking I should reach out. I'd like to talk if you're open to it. I'm in the city, actually. I got in from Portland last month. I have your mom's number, but I didn't want to go through her. I thought it was better to come to you directly. A pause, the particular pause of a man who knows he's done something wrong and is trying to find the version of himself that didn't. I'd like to see Lily, if that's something you'd be willing to talk about. He left his number. He said take care at the end, which was the kind of thing people said when they knew I love you was expired and goodbye felt too final. The elevator opened at 14. Janet put her phone in her jacket pocket and walked to her office and closed the door and sat at her desk and looked at the wall for approximately 90 seconds. Then she opened her laptop and went back to work. Annette. She didn't listen to the voicemail again. She didn't call back that day or the next. She sat with it the way she sat with difficult things, giving it space to show her its full shape before she responded to it, because responding too quickly to things like Derek was how she'd made her worst decisions the first time around. She told Lily on a Wednesday evening while they were doing the dishes, Lily washing Janet, drawing the specific domesticity of the routine, making hard conversations slightly more bearable. Your father called me, she said. He's in the city. He wants to see you. Lily kept washing. The water ran. Okay, she said. Then, what do you think? I think it's your choice. That's not what I asked. Janet dried a plate carefully. I think he's been gone a long time, and I think whatever his reasons are for coming back now, they're his reasons, and you should be allowed to decide if you want to know them. And if I do want to, then we'll figure out how to make that happen. Lily was quiet for a moment. The water ran. Outside, a siren peaked and faded in the particular way of New York's constant soundtrack. Is he different? Lily asked. I don't know. I haven't spoken to him. But you think he's not? Janet looked at her daughter, the set of her shoulders. The careful stillness that she recognized because she had cultivated the same stillness in herself for the same reasons. I don't know, she said again more carefully. I don't have enough information. Lily handed her the last glass. I want to meet him, she said. Just once. To see. Okay, Janet said. I'll call him. She dried the glass and set it in the cabinet and did not say anything else, because sometimes the most important thing you could give your child was the space to make a decision without immediately telling them what you thought of it. She called Nathaniel Cross that evening, which she had not planned to do, and understood as she was dialing was somewhat revealing. He answered on the second ring. I'm sorry to call without... I know we usually go through Sandra for... Janet. His voice was steady. What's wrong? She stopped. Nothing's wrong. I don't know why I called, actually. She laughed, brief and slightly uncomfortable. My ex-husband surfaced after 10 years. My daughter wants to meet him. I have 4 deliverables due Friday, and I haven't started 2 of them. She paused. It's a normal Wednesday. He was quiet for a moment. Is Lily all right? The fact that he remembered her daughter's name, she'd mentioned it once in the coffee shop on 23rd, landed in an unexpected way. She's fine. She's 14 and braver than I am, which I should probably be used to by now. And you, she looked out the dark window at the city. Managing. That's not the same as fine. No, she said. It's not. He said nothing for a moment, which was one of the things she was learning about him. He didn't fill silences. Most people rush to fill silences. He seemed to understand that sometimes a silence was doing something, and he let it do it. What do you need? He said. Right now. Tonight. She considered the question honestly, which she wasn't entirely used to being asked. I don't know, she said. I think I just needed to say it out loud. Then say it. And she did. Not everything, not the Derek history, not the full weight of it, but the outline of a Wednesday that had asked too much of her from 2 directions at once, and the particular exhaustion of being the one person in Lily's life who had to be steadier than she felt. She talked for maybe 7 minutes, which was more than she'd talked about herself to anyone except Rachel in recent memory. He listened without interrupting. When she was done, he said, You're a very good mother. She blinked. You don't know that. I know enough, he said. A woman who is careful about how she tells her 14-year-old daughter her absent father is back, who gives her the choice without weighting it. That's not a small thing, Janet. She said nothing. Get some sleep, he said. The deliverables will still be there in the morning. She laughed, really laughed, the chest version. That's the least reassuring thing anyone has ever said to me. It's true, though. Completely true. A pause that was comfortable rather than empty. Good night, he said. Good night, she said. She hung up and sat in the quiet of the apartment and felt inexplicably and specifically less alone than she had in a very long time. She noted this, filed it in the category she was running out of names for, and then she went and started the deliverables. December in New York had a specific quality that January and February didn't. A sense that the cold was still a novelty, the light still a pleasure. The urgency of the city briefly softened by the particular collective sentimentality that even the most unsentimental city in America allowed itself in its last month. The Cross Ventures lobby had a single arrangement of white flowers near the front desk that someone had decided was enough decoration, and Janet, arriving for a Thursday session in the second week of December, found herself thinking this was exactly right. The engagement was 7 weeks old. The brand positioning framework had been approved in full. The campaign architecture was in its second draft, which was usually where the interesting decisions happened. The first draft showed you what you thought you knew. The second draft showed you what you actually believed. She and Sandra had developed a clean working relationship, direct, efficient, mutually respectful. Sandra was good at her job in the way that people were good at jobs they'd been doing long enough to stop needing to prove they were good at them. She didn't posture. She didn't defer unnecessarily. When she disagreed with Janet's recommendations, she said so specifically, which Janet preferred enormously to the alternative. The working sessions with Nathaniel had continued in parallel, not formally structured, not on anyone's official calendar, but consistent. The coffee shop on 23rd twice in 2 weeks. A walk from the Cross Ventures building to Madison Square Park on a Thursday afternoon when the session ran short and neither of them apparently was in a hurry to go anywhere. An email thread about the secondary audience positioning that turned by the fourth reply into a conversation about whether cities could have personalities or whether that was just projection. She was concluding a genuinely unusual person. Not unusual in the way that wealth sometimes made people unusual. The self-mythology, the insulation, the gradual replacement of genuine opinion with the performance of opinion because everyone around you had stopped disagreeing. He was unusual in the older sense, singular, specific, interested in things for their own sake. He read actual books. He had opinions about architecture that were not derived from what was expensive. He asked questions and waited for the answer rather than constructing his response while the other person was still talking. She knew she was making a list. She was aware that making lists of someone's qualities was its own kind of activity separate from the professional relationship she had assigned this to. She was managing it. She was managing it competently. Rachel found her in the coffee room on a Tuesday, which was unusual because Rachel generally avoided the coffee room on Tuesdays due to an ongoing territorial conflict with someone from operations about the correct water temperature for pour-over coffee that had never been resolved, and both parties had decided to manage by avoidance. "I need to show you something," Rachel said. She was holding a printed email, which in the current year meant she wanted it to feel significant. Janet looked at it. It was a forwarded email chain. The original sender was someone named T. Briggs, whom Janet identified as one of the business development researchers in Marcus Webb's department. The chain appeared to be internal research notes on Cross Ventures' vendor history. "I asked Tommy to pull the vendor comp analysis," Rachel said, "for the quarterly benchmark. It's routine." "I know what the vendor comp analysis is. Read the third paragraph." Janet read the third paragraph. It said in the dry language of research notes that Cross Ventures' brand development division had engaged in preliminary discussions with 3 marketing firms in the 60 days preceding the Meridian engagement, 2 New York firms and 1 based in Chicago, and had declined to proceed to formal pitch with any of them. The notes listed the firms. Janet recognized all 3. Combined revenue north of $200 million. Their smallest client engagements were the size of Meridian's biggest. She set the paper on the counter. The research notes say they declined all 3. Without explanation. No reason in the record, just declined. Rachel looked at her steadily. "Janet, those firms don't get declined. The Chicago one did the Waldorf rebranding. The New York ones between them have done campaigns for 4 of the 10 biggest residential developers in the city. Maybe Cross Ventures had a specific vision that didn't fit their portfolio. Maybe." Rachel's voice was careful. "Or maybe the pitch opportunity never actually went to them competitively. Maybe it was created for someone else." The coffee room hummed with the particular low-frequency sound of office machinery doing its quiet work. "That's a significant accusation," Janet said. "It's a question," Rachel said. "I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I'm asking if you think it's odd." Janet looked at the email again. The names of the firms, the dates, the clean documentary absence of any explanation. "Leave this with me," she said. Rachel nodded once and walked out. She did not take the printed email back with her, which was its own kind of answer. Janet spent 4 evenings with what she could access from the outside CrossVenture's public filings industry press coverage of their prior agency relationships, any reference to Meridian in any prior CrossVenture's context. She was systematic about it the way she was systematic about research building a picture in layers. What she found, and what she kept finding as she went deeper, Meridian did not belong in this engagement by any conventional measure. Not by revenue, not by portfolio size, not by category experience. CrossVentures had, in every prior instance of engaging an outside agency, she found 3 clear precedents in 6 years worked with firms of substantial scale, firms that brought infrastructure and category depth. Meridian was excellent. She believed this completely. But excellent and appropriate were not always the same category. She sat with the research on a Sunday evening, Lily, at a study group at a friend's apartment, the apartment quiet around her. The research was spread across her coffee table browser tabs, printed notes, her own handwriting in the margins. She had not yet let herself draw the conclusion that was drawing itself. She picked up her phone, put it down, picked it up again. She did not call Nathaniel. She called Rachel. "I think it was constructed," she said when Rachel answered. "The opportunity. I think it was designed to come to us." Rachel was quiet for a moment. "By whom?" "I don't know all of it yet." "Do you have a guess?" She did. She was not ready to say it out loud because saying it out loud would make it a thing she had to respond to, and she was not ready to respond to it. "I'm going to make some calls tomorrow," she said. "I need to verify a few things first." "Janet," Rachel's voice was careful. "Whatever you find, it doesn't change the work. The work was real. The pitch was real. What you built was—" "I know," Janet said. "I know that, but I need to know." She called a contact at the Chicago firm on Monday morning from the conference room down the hall from her office with the door closed. His name was Alan Kraft. She'd known him from a mutual client relationship 3 years ago, and they'd stayed in professional contact in the specific way of the industry occasional email, a drink, at an annual conference, the maintenance of a relationship that might become useful. She kept it indirect. Industry conversation. How has business been heard? CrossVentures has been expanding. Did you pitch for the new brand work? Alan Kraft said, "We were going to. We had a preliminary conversation with their chief development officer, but it went quiet. They said they'd circle back and never did." A pause. "Why did you pick it up?" "We did," Janet said. "Lucky. How'd you get in the door?" "Through the request for proposal process," she said. "Huh. A neutral sound. They never sent us an RFP. They told us they were still in the evaluation phase." She kept her voice steady. "Well, you know how these things go." "I do," he said. "Congratulations. It's a big engagement." "Thank you, Alan." She hung up. She sat with her hands flat on the conference room table for a moment. Then she called the second firm, a New York agency she had a less direct connection to, so she was more oblique and got less specific information, but enough to confirm the shape of it. They had been in early conversation with CrossVentures, and the conversation had simply stopped. She sat in the conference room for a long time after the second call. The picture was clear now. She didn't need to verify the third firm. She understood the outline. CrossVentures had cleared the field. Not aggressively. No one had been told anything. No one had been actively excluded. The conversations had simply been allowed to fade. And then the RFP had gone to Meridian, to a firm that by every conventional standard should not have been on the list at all. It had been designed, she knew, with the particular certainty of a person who had done the work and followed it to the correct conclusion, that the person who had designed it was Nathaniel Cross. She sat in the conference room and let herself feel what this meant. She felt it in layers, which was how she felt most important things. The first layer was professional. If the opportunity had been constructed, if the RFP process had been managed to produce a specific outcome, then the entire premise of the engagement was different from what she'd understood it to be. Meridian had not won a competitive pitch. Meridian had been handed an invitation to a room with no other guests. This did not make the work less real. The strategy was real. The positioning framework was real. The creative direction was real. None of that was diminished. But the context was different. The story she had told herself, that she had competed and won, that the firm had risen to a level of visibility it had genuinely earned, that story had a different structure now. And the story you told yourself about your work mattered. It was not vanity. It was the architecture of your own competence. And if the foundation was altered even by something well-intentioned, the structure needed to be re-examined. The second layer was personal and harder to name. He had seen her in a coffee shop. He had been interested in her. She knew this. She had been managing the awareness of it for weeks. And his response to that interest had been to build her a professional opportunity, quietly, without telling her, without asking if she wanted to be helped. She understood the impulse. She understood that from where he sat it might have seemed generous rather than presumptuous. A man with resources who sees someone talented and finds a way to clear a path for them. But she had spent 10 years building something specific, the knowledge that what she had made. The apartment, the job, the daughter who could look at a problem and trust her own judgment, all of it built without a safety net, without a hand extended from a higher floor. It was the one thing that was entirely hers. And now she didn't know how much of it was. The third layer was the one she didn't want to look at, so she looked at it directly because looking away from things was not how she operated. She was angry. Not at him, or not only at him. She was angry at the specific quality of what had happened, which was that someone had tried to do something kind for her and had done it in the exact way that undermined the one thing she protected most carefully. It was the specific cruelty of good intentions. She gathered her notes from the conference room table, put them in her bag, and went back to her office. She had work to do. She would confront this when she had decided how. She confronted it on a Thursday at the coffee shop on 23rd. She had asked him to meet her there, which was a reversal of their usual dynamic, and she saw him register this when he arrived, the slight recalibration behind the eyes of someone who has read the register of a situation accurately. He sat. He ordered his coffee. He looked at her across the small table and waited. "I need you to tell me something," she said, "and I need you to tell me all of it." He looked at her steadily, said nothing. "Did you orchestrate the pitch?" she said. "Did you arrange for the RFP to come to Meridian?" So, a pause. Not long, a second, maybe two. The pause of someone deciding not how to answer, but how much. "Yes," he said. The single word landed with its full weight. She had known it was coming, and it still landed. "All of it," she said. "The other firms, were they genuinely in consideration? They were in preliminary conversation. I made a decision before the RFP process. The process was shaped around that decision." "Before the pitch?" "Yes. Before you'd seen any of my work." He was quiet for a moment. "I knew who you were before the pitch," he said. "I had you researched. I read work you'd published, case studies from prior engagements, a profile from a marketing industry journal from 2 years ago. I knew the quality of your thinking before you walked into that conference room." "You knew the quality of my thinking," she repeated, "because you researched me, because we met in a coffee shop." "Yes. And you thought the appropriate response to finding me interesting was to build me a professional opportunity without telling me." He didn't look away. "I thought it was a way to create a context." "A context," she said. "You created a context. Nathaniel." She almost never used his name in conversation. She noticed this about herself, the distance she had maintained in that specific way. "I have spent my entire professional life being evaluated on the same terms as everyone else. I have never asked for anything to be easier than it was. I have never wanted a door held open that wasn't being held for everyone. The work was yours," he said. "Everything after the opportunity, the pitch, the strategy, the engagement, that was entirely yours." "I know that. I know it. But I don't know it the way I knew it before I found out, and that's what you took from me." Her voice was steady. She was not going to lose her composure in a coffee shop on 23rd Street. "You took the clean version of it." He was quiet for a long moment. His hands were on the table, and she noticed that he did not reach for his coffee, did not shift in his chair, did not do any of the things people did when a conversation became uncomfortable and they needed something to do with their body. He just sat with it. "You're right," he said. "I didn't think about it that way. I should have." She looked at him. "That's not an excuse," he said. "I'm not explaining it away. I'm telling you that you've shown me something I missed." "What you missed," she said, "is that the way you help someone matters as much as the fact that you help them." "Yes," he said quietly. "That's exactly what I missed." The coffee shop hummed around them. Outside 23rd Street was doing its afternoon thing, taxis, pedestrians, the regular noise of a city that had no stake in any individual conversation. "I'm going to need some time," she said. "I know. I'm not ending the engagement. The work is real, and the team depends on it. But I need some distance from the personal part of this, until I've figured out how I feel about it." "Whatever you need," he said. She stood. She picked up her bag. She looked at him once more, sitting at the small table with his untouched coffee, not asking her to stay, not explaining further, not filling the space with anything. Just sitting with what he'd done and what she'd said about it honestly and completely. It was, she thought, the most she had ever respected someone at the exact moment she was walking away from them. She went out into the December afternoon and walked the 12 blocks to the subway rather than getting a cab because she needed the cold and the movement and the specific occupation of putting one foot in front of another. She did not call him that night or the following night. She worked. She delivered the second draft campaign architecture to Sandra on schedule and received feedback that was specific and useful. She did not go to the Cross Ventures building for 10 days, communicating entirely through Sandra, an email which was professionally appropriate and which Sandra, to her credit, did not comment on. Derek had called again. She texted back a brief response. "I'll be in touch about Lily. Give me a few days," and he had not called again, which told her something about the degree to which his interest was conditional. Lily had asked about it once, and Janet had said, "He's in the city. We're figuring out the timing." Lily had nodded with the particular nod of a 14-year-old who was deciding not to push, which was its own kind of grace. On the 11th day, Rachel knocked on her office door. "Cross Ventures campaign milestone review is next week," Rachel said. "Sandra called. She wants to know if you're presenting in person or by video." "In person," Janet said. "Good." Rachel sat down. She looked at Janet for a moment with the direct assessment of a friend who had decided to say the thing. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine." "You've been here until 8 every night for 2 weeks. There's a lot of work." "Janet," Rachel's voice was quiet. "Whatever happened, and I'm not asking. I can see you don't want to talk about it. You should know that the work has been exceptional. The campaign architecture is the best thing you've produced in 8 years. I don't know if that matters right now, but it does." Janet looked at her. "It matters," she said. "Thank you." "Okay." Rachel stood. "And for what it's worth, whatever someone did that upset you, the fact that it upset you this much tells me it wasn't nothing." She left before Janet could respond, which was characteristic and also merciful. Janet sat at her desk and turned Rachel's last sentence over. "The fact that it upset you this much tells me it wasn't nothing." She knew it wasn't nothing. She had known that from the coffee shop in October. She had been managing the knowledge of it with great precision for 2 months, and precision was not, it turned out, the same thing as not feeling it. She opened her laptop and went back to work. But the sentence stayed with her, quiet and insistent, the way true things did. The milestone review went well. Janet had expected it to, because she had prepared it with the same systematic rigor she brought to everything, and the campaign architecture was genuinely strong. The kind of work where the logic of each decision was visible, and the cumulative effect was something that felt inevitable rather than arbitrary. Sandra's team had questions, all of them good, and Janet answered each one specifically, and by the end of the 2-hour session, the second draft architecture had been approved for development with 1 structural revision and several small refinements. Nathaniel was not in the room. She had prepared for the possibility that he would be and found when he wasn't, a feeling. She couldn't entirely name relief folded around something that wasn't quite its opposite. She shook hands with Sandra at the elevator and rode down to the lobby and stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the January cold. It was the second week of January, and the city had shed its December sentimentality and returned to its usual transaction, and she thought, this is what you do. You keep working, you do the work as well as you can, and you let that be the answer to the question you can't resolve any other way. She pulled her coat and walked to the subway. 3 days later, on a Friday afternoon at 4:15, Janet's laptop pinged with an internal Meridian notification. A shared document had been updated in the Cross Ventures project folder, the administrative folder, not the creative materials, which meant it was probably a contract amendment or an invoice. She opened it absently. The document was not a contract amendment. It was an email, or rather, it was a forwarded email chain that had been saved, apparently by accident, into the shared administrative folder rather than Craig Holt's personal files where it should have been. The chain was between Craig Holt and a man named Peter Connolly, Senior Vice President of New Business Development at Cross Ventures. It was dated 6 weeks before the Meridian pitch had been announced internally. She read it. She read it twice. She read it a third time to make certain she was not misunderstanding the syntax of it, the specific language of business correspondence that could sometimes obscure what was actually being said. She was not misunderstanding it. The first email from Craig Holt to Peter Connolly read, "Peter, Following up on our conversation at the ULI event, I understand North Carolina has been looking for a specific strategic profile for the new brand engagement. I think I have exactly the right person. She's been with us 8 years, led our last 4 major pitches, and has a sensibility that I think would resonate with his vision for the project. I'm attaching her published work and 2 case studies from engagements she's led. I'd suggest framing this as a competitive pitch process so she engages with full investment. She's the kind of professional who performs best under those conditions. Happy to discuss logistics. The reply from Peter Connolly 2 days later. Craig forwarded this to NC directly. He found the work compelling. We'll proceed with the RFP structured as you suggested. I'll have Sandra reach out to Meridian through official channels next week. And Craig's response, perfect. I appreciate the introduction. Let's make sure this leads somewhere for both organizations. Janet closed the laptop. She sat in her office, which had been her office for 8 years, and looked at the view of 6th Avenue that she had looked at through this window for 8 years. And she felt something moving through her that had a different quality from what she'd felt in the coffee shop on 23rd when Nathaniel had confirmed that he'd orchestrated the pitch. That had been anger with grief inside it, the grief of a clean story complicated. This was something colder and more particular. Craig Holt had known who Nathaniel Cross was interested in before the Cross Ventures engagement had ever been announced internally. He had written, she heard the exact phrase again in her head, framing this as a competitive pitch process, so she engages with full investment. He had suggested the structure. He had packaged her published work, her case studies, her 8 years of effort, and sent it to a client's SVP as a kind of prospectus. He had not asked her. He had not mentioned it to her. He had presented her to a potential client as a professional asset. The way you presented a property here is what it can do. Here is what it produces. Here is why you want it in your portfolio. She sat with this for a long time. The office around her was doing its late Friday emptying voices, quieting the particular winding down sounds of a week ending. Through the glass wall of her office, she could see David's desk already cleared, Nina's chair already empty. She had won the pitch on merit. She had built the brand strategy on merit. She had earned every deliverable the Cross Ventures team had approved, earned every email exchange, earned the work, and the relationship and the particular quality of attention she had been receiving. Except she had never agreed to be the thing that made all of this happen. She had never agreed to be packaged and presented as an asset in a transaction she knew nothing about. Nathaniel had seen her in a coffee shop and found a way to create an opportunity. His motivations were his own, and she had confronted him about them, and he had told the truth. And the truth was complicated, but it was his complication to have. Craig had watched her for 8 years and seen not a person, but a commodity. Had seen an angle and worked it silently for his own benefit, while she poured every professional and personal resource she had into a pitch she believed she had earned the right to make. Let's make sure this leads somewhere for both organizations. She was not an organization. She did not react immediately. This was important to her not for appearances, but because she had learned in the specific school of having to get things right on her own, that reacting immediately to shock was almost always the wrong choice. The first response was almost always the largest and least useful one. She closed the project folder. She saved nothing, forwarded, nothing, printed, nothing. She went home at 5:15. She made dinner. She helped Lily with a history essay on the labor movement. Lily had strong opinions about the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire that were historically accurate and refreshingly unambiguous. They watched 40 minutes of something on television that Janet couldn't have identified afterward. Lily went to bed. Janet sat on the couch in the quiet apartment and thought it through. The question was what to do with what she knew. She could do nothing. The engagement was profitable. The work was real. Craig's arrangement had not ultimately harmed anything except her self-understanding. She could file it away, finish the engagement, and let the institutional reality of her situation, a stable job, a good income, a daughter starting high school next year who would need things that required reliable income, make the decision for her. She could confront Craig, which would require telling him how she'd found the email, which would lead to a conversation about professional process, and probably an HR involvement and an outcome she couldn't fully predict. She could threaten to leave, which was only a threat if it was real. And if it was real, she needed somewhere to go. Or she could start asking different questions. She was very good at asking the right questions. She opened her laptop and wrote down everything she knew and everything she could logically infer in the clean, organized way she built strategic arguments, And then she looked at it for a long time. At midnight, she made one decision. She would not react until she had spoken to Nathaniel Cross. She called him at 8 the next morning. He answered immediately. "I need to see you," she said. "Not at Cross Ventures, not at the coffee shop. Somewhere neutral." A brief pause. "The park," he said. "Madison Square South entrance. 11 o'clock. I'll be there." She arrived at 11:05. He was already there, standing near the path. Dark coat, no hat, despite the cold, looking in no particular direction, with the patient stillness of a man who was comfortable waiting. She walked up to him and handed him her phone screen facing out. She had photographed the email chain. He looked at it. He read it carefully, the way he read everything fully, without rushing. She watched his face. What she saw there, something tightening, something that started as recognition and moved quickly through to something darker. He handed the phone back. "When did you find this?" "Yesterday afternoon. It was filed to the wrong folder by mistake." He was quiet. He looked at a point somewhere beyond the park's bare trees at the Manhattan skyline, doing its impassive winter thing against the gray sky. "You knew Craig reached out," she said. "It was not a question. I knew Peter Connolly had a conversation with someone at Meridian. I didn't know who. I didn't know the specific terms." He turned to look at her directly. "I didn't know he'd framed it as a competitive process without telling you. But you knew someone from Meridian had approached Cross Ventures." "Yes." She held that. "You didn't think I should know that." "It didn't change the substance of the opportunity from where I stood," he said. "The quality of the work was always going to be the deciding factor. You're telling me that the way something happens doesn't change what it is. I'm telling you what I thought. And I'm telling you," she said quietly, "that you were wrong. Again." She said it without heat, not an accusation, a fact. "Nathaniel, I've had 2 people now make decisions about my professional life without telling me. One of them was motivated by something that was at least personally generous, and the other one packaged me like a product and sold the deal to a client without my knowledge. And both of them thought that because the outcome was good, the method didn't matter." He was looking at her with an expression she'd never quite seen from him. Something close to the look of a person recognizing a thing they had wanted not to see. "They were different," he said. "Yes," she said. "They were entirely different. And you understand why I need you to see that the difference doesn't absolve either one." He was quiet for a moment. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet." She looked out at the park, 2 dogs being walked by someone who was clearly on a phone call, a jogger moving along the path, the ordinary Saturday morning life of a city that didn't notice. "I'm going to need some time to think about that." "Janet." He waited until she looked at him. "Whatever you decide to do about Craig or about Meridian, I want you to know something." He paused, choosing the words with the care he brought to things he meant. "I came to Cross Ventures 2 years ago specifically to create projects that would be long-lasting, things built to last. And the one thing I've been certain of throughout this entire engagement is that the brand strategy you've built is the work of someone who should be running her own firm. Not someone's firm. Hers." He held her gaze. "Whatever happened before the pitch, that's true independently of all of it." She looked at him for a long moment. "I'll think about it," she said. They walked once around the park in the cold, saying very little, and then she went one way and he went another. Derek called on a Sunday. She had been expecting the call. She had sent him a text 3 days earlier saying she was ready to talk, and he had texted back a time, and she had sat at the kitchen table at 11 a.m. on Sunday with her coffee and a specific composure that she had been building toward for the past several years without quite knowing it. He sounded on the phone like himself. This was both surprising and entirely unsurprising. She had not spoken to him in 5 years, not since a brief practical call about a tax document, and she had expected that time would have altered him in ways she could hear. It hadn't. The voice was the same, the particular register of a man who was charming in the sense of being able to hold a conversation, but did not have the deeper quality that charm sometimes concealed. They went through the surface of it. He was well. Portland had been good. He had a job in logistics, which he said with the specific neutrality of someone who had made peace with a career that didn't live up to something. He asked about her work with the vagueness of someone who hadn't really been following it. "I want to see Lily," he said eventually. "I should have stayed in better contact. I know that. I'm not making excuses." He was making excuses. The structure of the statement, "I know that I'm not making excuses," was itself an excuse, the self-awareness positioned as absolution. But she had decided before the call not to go into the history of it. The history was known to both of them, and would not be resolved by a Sunday phone call. Lily wants to meet you, she said. She's decided that herself without prompting from me either direction. She's old enough to make that call. Of course, but I need you to understand something. She kept her voice even. She is not a reconciliation. She is not an opportunity to rebuild something between us. Whatever is or isn't between you and Lily is only between you and Lily. I'm not a step in any larger plan. A pause. Janet, I'm not. I know, she said. I just need to say it once. He agreed to the terms as she had expected him to. They set a date a Saturday in late January, a lunch, a museum. Something that gave Lily an activity and a context and an exit strategy if she needed one. Neutral ground, limited time, her mother knowing where they were. She hung up and sat with the quiet of the completed call. 14 years. The man who had left on a Tuesday when Lily was 4. The apartment she'd found 2 weeks later, smaller and cheaper, that had nonetheless been her apartment, her name on the lease, her choice of what went on the walls, her kitchen, and her daughter, and her particular version of a life that was small in certain ways and entire in every way that mattered. She had never needed Derek to come back to confirm that she'd done well without him, but she noticed sitting at the kitchen table in the January morning that some part of her had been waiting not for him, but for the moment of looking at the full picture clearly and knowing she was fine. She was fine. She was genuinely fine. That was different from managing, which she was also, and would probably always be. She told Lily that afternoon. Lily was on the couch with her biology notes and a cup of tea that had gone cold, a state she seemed to find acceptable. You talked to him. This morning, you're meeting him Saturday, January 24th. Lunch and the Natural History Museum. Lily looked at her notes. Okay. How are you feeling about it? I don't know yet. She turned a page. I think I'm trying not to feel about it until I've actually done it. Is that weird? No, Janet said. That's actually very sensible. Mrs. Alvarez says I'm emotionally mature for my age. Mrs. Alvarez keeps being right. Lily looked up. Mom, are you okay with it? Actually okay, not just saying you're okay. Janet thought about the question honestly, the way she tried to always do with this particular person. I'm actually okay, she said. You should know him, whatever that turns out to mean. Lily studied her for a moment with those eyes that were Janet's own eyes, and somehow more open than Janet's had ever been. You're dealing with a lot right now, she said. Work stuff, I can tell. It's being handled. Is it the cross ventures thing? Partly. And the guy? Janet was quiet for a moment. What guy? Lily gave her a look so precisely calibrated to the absurdity of the question that Janet almost laughed. Mom, come on. He's a professional contact. Okay? He is. Okay. Lily turned back to her biology notes with the specific composure of someone who had made their point and was willing to let it land in its own time. I'm just saying, you're different lately. Not bad different. Just more like you're actually here. Janet looked at her daughter, at the biology notes, and the cold tea, and the easy intelligence of a person she had made from scratch, essentially, in the specific and exhausting and irreplaceable way of single parenthood. I'm always here, she said. I know. Lily picked up her pen. But you know what I mean. She did know. She sat down on the other end of the couch and did not say anything else. And they existed in the same room in the quiet way that was one of the better things about having been each other's primary company for most of their respective lives. She went to Craig's office on a Monday morning in the 3rd week of January before anyone else had arrived. She knocked once and opened the door without waiting for a response, because she was not going to negotiate the terms of this conversation through a closed door. Craig looked up from his laptop, startled. Janet, it's 8. I know what time it is. She sat down across from his desk. She had her phone in her hand and she set it on the desk screen, facing up with the photograph of the email chain visible. He looked at it. She watched him go through the stages: confusion, recognition, the specific quality of a person who had gambled on something never being found. How did you... It was filed to the wrong folder. Administrative accident. She kept her voice neutral. I need you to tell me what you thought you were doing. He sat back. He had the look of a man constructing a narrative which she could read at some distance after 8 years of working under him. I was creating an opportunity for you, he said. A legitimate one. I met Peter Connolly at a ULI event, and when I heard Cross Ventures was looking for a brand strategist for a major new project, I immediately thought of you. And you pitched me to them, she said, without asking. I sent your published work, your case studies. I was acting as your advocate. My advocate. She let the word sit. And when you suggested they structure it as a competitive pitch, so I would engage with full investment, you were advocating for me then too. He was quiet. You were managing me, she said. You needed me to perform at my best. You weren't advocating for me. You were using my performance to get your firm through a door. It couldn't open on its own merit. Janet, it's what the email says. In your words. She picked up her phone. You never asked me if I wanted to be presented to a client. You never told me you'd had a conversation with anyone at Cross Ventures before the RFP. You designed a process that used my effort and my talent and my belief that I had earned this pitch, and you used all of it for a transaction you were running. Craig looked at his desk. She had seen him uncomfortable before he was a man who managed upward well and sometimes forgot that there were people looking at him from a level eye, not from below. He said eventually, the firm benefited. You benefited. The engagement is real, she said. The work is real. I know that. I'm not arguing about the engagement. She put her phone back in her pocket. I'm telling you that I know what you did, and I'm deciding what to do with that knowledge. I wanted you to know that I know. He looked at her carefully. What are you going to do? I haven't decided yet, she said. But I'd suggest that in the meantime, everything related to the Cross Ventures engagement comes through me directly. Not through you, not through your channels, me. He held her gaze. He had the calculation in his eyes of a man trying to determine how serious this was and whether he could manage it from where he stood. Of course, he said. She stood. She did not say anything else. She went back to her office and sat down and looked at the 6th Avenue view and felt the very specific satisfaction of having said a true thing to the right person and walked away with her dignity intact. Nathaniel called her that evening. Sandra told me you made some changes to the communication structure on the account, he said. I direct all communications now, she said. Through me. A pause. Craig, yes. He was quiet for a moment. Do you want to tell me what you're going to do? She was sitting at the kitchen table, the apartment quiet around her Lily at basketball practice back at 8. The January dark outside the windows had the specific quality of the city stripped back to its bones by cold. I think I'm going to leave, she said. The firm. I've been thinking about it for 2 weeks, and it's the only answer that doesn't compromise something I'm not willing to compromise. And the engagement, I'd have to talk to you about how to handle the transition, whether I can take it with me or whether it stays with Meridian. That's a contractual question. The contract is with the agency, he said slowly. But the strategy is yours. The creative direction is yours. A pause. The relationship is mine to manage. She heard what he was and wasn't saying. What are you offering, Nathaniel? I'm not offering anything, he said. I'm saying that if you were going to open your own firm, the Cross Ventures engagement could potentially move with you if the legal structure allowed for it, and if you wanted it. And I'm saying, he paused, I have people I trust to evaluate a business structure. If you wanted to talk through the mechanics of starting something, I'd be willing to put you in front of them, as a resource, not as an investment unless you asked for one. She was quiet. You'd know about it this time, he said. Every part of it. If I did anything, you'd know before I did it. You understand why I'm going to need that to be explicit, she said. Not implied. Explicit. I understand. She looked at the dark window. The city out there enormous and indifferent and full of things she had built a life within despite all the ways it could have gone differently. I need to think, she said. Take the time you need. I always do, she said. But she was already thinking. And what she was thinking about behind the practical architecture of the decision. The legal questions, the financial risk, the specific shape of the leap was a version of the future she had not let herself imagine in full until just now. Her name on something that was entirely hers. She let herself imagine it for exactly long enough to know that she wanted it. Then she started making a list. She told Rachel on a Wednesday, which was not the day she'd planned, but was the day Rachel sat down across from her at lunch and said, whatever it is, just tell me. And so she did. Rachel listened without interrupting, which wasn't her natural mode, but which she could do when the situation warranted it. She listened through the email, through Craig, through Nathaniel's offer, through Janet's decision, and then she sat for a moment with her hands around her coffee cup and looked out the window at 6th Avenue. How long have you been thinking about this? She said. Since Nathaniel Cross first asked for a direct copy of the brand brief, Janet said. I didn't let myself think it seriously until the email, but the idea was already there. You've been running the math. For 2 months. Rachel nodded slowly. She was one of the few people Janet knew who was genuinely comfortable with silence. She let it sit for a moment before she said, "What do you need from me?" "I might need you eventually," Janet said, "if you were interested. Not right away. I can't promise you anything about right away." Rachel looked at her with an expression that was the particular combination of affection and exasperation of an 8-year friendship. "Interested," she said. "Yes, obviously." She pointed her coffee cup. "But, Janet, before all of this Nathaniel Cross, what is that? What? It's complicated." "That means something is happening. It means it's complicated. Those aren't mutually exclusive statements." Janet looked out the window. February. Now the city in its bleakest month, the Christmas sentiment entirely gone, spring still genuinely far away, just the plain hard fact of a cold city doing what it did. "I don't know yet what it is," she said honestly. "I'm not in a position to know while he's a professional relationship. And when he's not," she looked back at Rachel. "Ask me then." Rachel drank her coffee. "I'm going to say something you don't have to respond to. Okay? In 8 years, I have seen you work harder than anyone I know. I have seen you sacrifice things that other people would have required someone else to sacrifice for them. I have seen you be the kind of competent that makes people around you lazier because they know you'll catch it." She set down her cup. "I have never, not once, seen you let yourself be seen by someone the way you've been seen in the past 3 months. Whatever the complications are, I'm not sure the complication is the problem." Janet said nothing. "That's all," Rachel said. "I said I wouldn't require a response." They finished lunch. They went back to work. Janet had a call at 2 and a deliverable due to Sandra at 4 and a review meeting with her own team at 5. And she moved through all of it with the practiced efficiency of a person who had been making herself useful in a specific building for 8 years and was beginning to understand with the particular clarity of endings that she had gotten everything from this place that it had to give her. She met with Nathaniel's financial contact, a woman named Patricia Drummond, who was a managing partner at a boutique advisory firm on Madison Avenue on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks into February. Patricia was 60, silver-haired, precise, in the way of someone who had been answering questions for 30 years and had developed great patience for imprecision in other people. They talked for 2 hours. Janet came with a document, a preliminary business structure she had drafted over 2 weeks in the evenings after Lily was asleep at the kitchen table, with the same notebook she'd used for the Cross Ventures pitch. It was not polished. It was the first honest draft of an idea, all the thinking visible, but it was complete. Revenue projections, cost structure, staffing model, client acquisition strategy, a 12-month runway plan. The risks were annotated. The assumptions were labeled as assumptions. Patricia read it without comment while Janet sat across from her. At the end, Patricia looked up. "This is well constructed. Thank you. The runway assumption is conservative. You'd probably need 14 months, not 12 in the first year if you're building from scratch without existing client contracts. I was hoping to bring the Cross Ventures engagement. If you can bring Cross Ventures, the economics change significantly." Patricia made a note. "Structure it as a services agreement rather than an agency retainer. You want the relationship to be with you personally, not with the entity until the entity is established enough to hold relationships on its own." She paused. "Do you have legal counsel?" "Not yet. I'll give you 2 names. Both are good with creative firm formation and services contracting." Janet wrote them down. "Investment," Patricia said. "Mr. Cross mentioned he'd discuss the possibility." "As a last resort," Janet said. "I'd rather bootstrap as far as possible." Bootstrapping a firm of this type to profitability without bridge capital takes 18 to 24 months from a standing start. With one significant anchor client, 12 months is achievable. Patricia folded her hands. "The question is what you're protecting. If you take investment, you give up some independence in exchange for runway and resources. If you don't, you have full independence and tighter cash flow." "I want to control the firm," Janet said. "Fully. Any investment would have to be structured without equity." "A loan, then, at commercial terms?" "Yes." Patricia made another note. "That can be structured. It requires an investor who trusts the revenue projections." She looked up. "Mr. Cross seems prepared to trust them." "He is," Janet said. "But I need him to know, and I need this to be documented, that the loan structure doesn't create any advisory role, any board seat, any decision-making authority. clean commercial terms. That's an unusual request in the context of a personal relationship with the investor. It's a necessary one, Janet said. Patricia looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone who had seen a great many people negotiate their own terms and could assess fairly accurately who was going to hold them. "I'll draft the term sheet," she said. She gave notice on a Friday. She had written the resignation letter the night before at the kitchen table. Lily already asleep, the apartment around her holding its specific Saturday Eve quiet. It was 3 paragraphs. The first stated her resignation, an effective date 4 weeks, the professional standard. The second expressed genuine appreciation for the 8 years and the opportunities and the specific people she was grateful to, which was a real list and not a formality. The third paragraph she had written and rewritten 4 times. The final version said, "I am leaving to establish my own practice, which is the direction this work has been pointing me toward for some time. I wish Meridian every success in its continued growth." It did not mention Craig. It did not mention Cross Ventures. It did not mention the email. She had thought about whether to say more and had decided in the specific way of someone who has identified the difference between justice and usefulness, that what mattered was the exit and not the indictment. Craig received the letter at 9 a.m. He came to her office at 9:15. He had the look of a man who had expected a version of this and was still surprised by it. "Janet, my transition plan is already drafted," she said. "Nina is best positioned to handle the day-to-day on the Cross Ventures engagement for the remainder of the term with appropriate support. I'll brief her thoroughly." He looked at her. He understood she could see that the conversation he might have wanted to have, the negotiation, the counteroffer, the attempt to make this about something other than what it was not available to him. She had not left him the door. "The Cross Ventures engagement," he said carefully. "Where does that stand?" "That's a question for Sandra Merrill," Janet said, "and for your attorney." He nodded. There was underneath the practiced authority something that might have been the look of a man who knew what he'd done and had not quite managed to believe it would cost him anything real. She did not feel sorry for him. She felt clear. 4 weeks, she said. "I'll make the transition as complete as possible." She went back to her work. The Saturday that Lily met Derek was cold and pale, the sky the particular white of a New York winter afternoon that couldn't decide whether to snow. Janet drove them to the restaurant, a casual Italian place on the Upper West Side, that she had chosen specifically because it was loud enough that silences wouldn't feel loud, and familiar enough that Lily would be comfortable, and then she went around the corner to a coffee shop and sat at a table by the window and ordered an Americano and waited. She had offered to stay. Lily had said no. The specific quality of the no not rejecting her, simply claiming the right to do this independently, was one of the more recognizable things about her daughter, and Janet had honored it without question. She sat with her coffee and the book she'd brought and the ambient noise of a coffee shop on a Saturday, and she did not read the book. 2 hours later, Lily texted ready. She came around the corner and Lily was there standing on the sidewalk in her large coat, a paper bag from the restaurant in one hand. She'd apparently gotten dessert to go. Janet didn't ask for the first 30 seconds. They walked in silence to the car. "Well," Janet said. Lily was quiet for a moment. She considered. "He's not a bad person. He's just not a very substantial one, if that makes sense." "It makes sense. He tried really hard. I could tell he'd rehearsed things." Lily looked out the car window. He asked about school and he asked about basketball, and then he ran out of questions and we talked about Portland for a while. She paused. "He doesn't really know me. He wanted me to be more glad to see him than I was." "Were you glad?" "I don't know. A little." She unwrapped the dessert, a cannoli, and took a bite. "I think I mostly just wanted to know what he was like. Now I know. He's fine. He's not the dad I needed when I was 4. She was quiet for a moment. "Is that okay to say?" "You can say anything true." "Okay." She ate her cannoli and looked at the city going past. "I don't think I need to see him again. Not right away, anyway. Maybe when I'm older. When it's more on my terms. Then that's what we'll do." "Mom." Lily turned to look at her. "You did a good job. Without him. I want you to know I know that." Janet kept her eyes on the road because they were on the West Side Highway, and the traffic required it, and also because she needed a moment that her daughter didn't need to see. "Thank you," she said. "That means everything." "Good." Lily turned back to her cannoli. "Can we get pizza tonight?" "Yes," Janet said. "We can absolutely get pizza." Cole and Company Strategies was incorporated on the 14th of March. The name had not been a difficult choice. She had considered several variations on her name, a more abstract professional title, and had come back every time to the simplest version. Her name, her company, nothing that needed to be explained or justified or made into something more impressive than it was. The office was a sublease in Chelsea, a space that had previously been used by a small graphic design firm. 2 large rooms, tall windows, a reception area that was currently unfurnished. The rent was manageable against the Cross Ventures revenue, which had been restructured as a direct services agreement with JaJanet Cole, individually pending formal assignment to Cole and Coney upon incorporation. Nathaniel's loan structured precisely as Patricia had outlined commercial terms. No equity, no advisory role documented and signed by both parties, with their respective counsel present, had covered the 6-month runway and the setup costs. It was the most transactional moment she had ever had with him, and also paradoxically, the one that had produced the specific confidence she needed. He had signed what she asked without modification. He had not tried to make it into something larger or more personal. He had looked at her across the attorney's table and signed his name and folded his copy of the agreement and said, "Good luck, though you won't need it." She had put the signed document in her bag and felt walking out of the attorney's office into the cold March afternoon exactly as large as she wanted to be. Rachel came on in month 2, a decision Rachel described as the easiest professional choice of her career, which was both generous and JaJanet suspected entirely true. They hired a junior strategist named Amara, who had been at a larger firm and was worth twice what they could currently pay her, a fact they were transparent about. Amara had said, "I'd rather be at the beginning of something good than in the middle of something fine." JaJanet had hired her on the spot. Nina, who had not worked for Craig but had worked alongside JaJanet for 4 years, called 6 weeks in to say she was thinking of leaving Meridian and wondered if there was room. There wasn't room yet, not financially. JaJanet told her that honestly and told her to call back in 4 months. She did. There was room. The first time Lily met Nathaniel was an accident, which was how most things that mattered happened. It was a Tuesday evening, early April, and JaJanet was working late at the Chelsea office, a pitch preparation that had gone long when Nathaniel arrived to drop off a physical document that his attorney had been unable to send digitally in time for a morning meeting. He could have sent a messenger. He hadn't. Lily was there because her basketball practice had been canceled, and JaJanet's mother had had a migraine, and there had been no good option except to bring her daughter to the office, where she was sitting in the reception area with her headphones on, and her homework spread across 2 chairs, entirely self-sufficient in the way she had learned to be. Nathaniel came through the door and stopped. Lily pulled off her headphones. She looked at him with a directness that was entirely her mother's, and somehow more open about it. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said. JaJanet came out of this back room. "Oh." A beat. "Nathaniel, this is Lily." "Lily, this is Nathaniel Cross." "I know who he is," Lily said, not unkindly, just factually. "You work with my mom." "I do," he said. "And other things," Lily said. A pause. Nathaniel looked at her with the expression of someone who had been assessed very quickly by someone very young and was taking it seriously. "And other things," he agreed. Lily looked at him for another moment. Then, "Is it a long drop-off? My mom has 40 minutes of work left." "I'm not staying," he said. "Okay." She put her headphones back on and returned to her homework. He caught JaJanet's eye. Something in his expression was unexpected, something warmer than his usual register and quieter. He set the document on the reception desk. 40 minutes, he said to JaJanet. "I'll wait downstairs." "You don't need to wait." "I know," he said. He went downstairs. Lily did not look up from her homework, but after 30 seconds she said without removing her headphones, "He waited. He said he would." That's the kind of thing that means something. She turned a page. "Just so you know." JaJanet looked at her daughter. Then she went back to her last 40 minutes of work. They did not rush it. That was, she thought afterward, the thing she was most proud of. Not the company, not the contract, not any of the professional architecture she had built in the spaces of her life. The way they didn't rush it. In April, they went to dinner, just the 2 of them, a real dinner, a Saturday with no work agenda. A restaurant in the West Village that he had been going to for 15 years, and that had the quality of his favorite places excellent, without being self-congratulatory. In May, they went to a concert at Carnegie Hall that Lily had heard about and decided they should go to, which was her particular way of giving permission without being asked for it. Nathaniel had sat through 2.5 hours of chamber music with the full attention he brought to things, and had said at the end that he'd forgotten how much he liked it. Lily had said, "You probably need reminders about things like that." He had said, "You're probably right." They had looked at each other with the recognition of two people who were going to be in each other's lives. In June, he told her about Catherine, really told her the full version, not the edited one. The illness that had taken 18 months. The way Marcus had been 13 when she died, and had not cried at the funeral, and had not stopped crying on and off for the following year. The way Nathaniel had worked himself into an abstraction of a person, and had done it deliberately and had not quite known he'd done it, until a woman spilled coffee on him in a midtown coffee shop and walked away as if he were unremarkable. She had listened to all of it. She had not tried to fix any of it, because it was not fixable. It was just true. The way grief was true. The specific permanent architecture of loss that a person built the rest of their life around rather than through. She told him about Derek. The real version, not the clean factual version she'd been telling for 10 years, but the specific one, the specific Tuesday morning, the specific 2 suitcases, the specific way she'd stood in the kitchen of an apartment she could no longer afford, and looked at the space where his coat had been on the hook by the door and understood in about 30 seconds that she was going to have to be everything now. He listened. He did not pity her. She had been right from the beginning in her assessment of him on that front. What he offered was the quality of attention that said, "I am seeing you clearly, and what I see is not a story of damage, but a story of a person." She had needed to be seen that way for a long time. She had not known until it happened how much. Epilogue. 14 months later. The 3rd floor of the Chelsea building had been Cole & Company's space for 4 months now. They'd taken it over from the sublease, outgrown the original footprint, added 2 more people, absorbed a second anchor client in the luxury hospitality space, whose CEO had been introduced to Janet by James O.B., the architect she'd met at the Meatpacking District dinner in November. It was a Thursday in May. The particular May that New York occasionally produced, warm without humidity, bright without the glare of summer, the kind of afternoon that made the city seem briefly like a place that had been designed to be pleasant. The windows were open. The office had the low-level productive hum of a team in the middle of a project that everyone believed in. Janet was at the head of the conference table with Amara and a new client, the managing director of a boutique hospitality group that wanted to expand from 3 properties to 8 over 5 years and needed a brand strategy that could hold the identity of the thing as it grew. The kind of problem Janet could solve in her sleep and still found interesting, which was the correct relationship to have with your work. She was in the middle of explaining the difference between a brand that scales and a brand that replicates when she glanced through the glass wall of the conference room to the reception area. Nathaniel was sitting in one of the chairs by the reception desk. He had a newspaper, an actual physical newspaper, folded to an inside section, and he was reading it with his full attention. He had arrived quietly enough that she hadn't heard him come in. He was not looking at his phone. He was not speaking to anyone. He was simply there in the way of someone who was comfortable being where they were. He had mentioned months ago, early on in the coffee shop on 23rd, that he didn't do things halfway. She had been learning in all the time since what this looked like in practice. It looked like this. She turned back to the client. "The mistake brands make when they scale," she said, "is treating growth as a problem of quantity rather than quality. You're not trying to build more of the same thing. You're trying to build more of the same feeling. That's a different challenge, and it's what we're going to solve." The managing director nodded. Amara opened her laptop. The Thursday afternoon did its May thing outside the windows. At the conference room door, a small brass plate installed 3 months ago after they'd moved into the full floor. She had gone back and forth about it, and in the end had kept it simple. Cole & Company Strategies. Her name, her company, all of it. The pitch, the work, the discovery, the anger, the clarity, the exit, the beginning. She had walked through all of it, and this was where she had arrived. She had arrived here herself. She intended to stay.